Okay, TB Nation, it's time to talk about Christina P, because this all-around fraudster just got exposed by CNN. And while it seems that her past and present has been thoroughly documented, the truth about Christina P has remained hidden until now. Now, while everyone knows Christina started off her career on MTV's Road Rules and has become a massive stand-up comic and podcaster, in truth, no one knows the real Christina. And though she constantly reminds her listeners that she's an ex-goth Angelino of Hungarian descent, I've dug up the colorful but contradictory truth. You see, if you go to Christina's own Wikipedia page, you can clearly see it claims she was born in Ontario, Canada. But I found these legal documents showing that Christina only entered the country for the first time when she was 18 years old. And that's because Christina P was actually raised in England and is the granddaughter of the inventor of Skittles. And if you don't believe me, just look it up. Skittles originated in Great Britain in 1971, was bought by the Mars Company for US distribution in 1974. So Christina P grew up a rich, proper British posh girl who moved to Canada in the Commonwealth at age 18 with dreams of stardom. And it was in fact her love of the Mr. Bean TV series that originally kicked off her desire to pursue comedy. The only problem was, at that time in the 90s, Christina's prim and proper English girliness alienated her from the other stand-ups who were completely alting out. And according to open micers who started comedy with her at the time, one day she abruptly quit and was never seen again. In Canada, that is. Because a year later, she's on the American TV show Road Rules and is sporting a new alternative haircut, and has somehow lost her British accent entirely. Now, many people have attempted to connect Christina's stint on Road Rules in 1998 with comedian Theo Von's time on the same show in the year 2000. But if you watched my episode on Theo, you'd know that much like Christina's Skittle-rich family paid to have her placed on the show, he too was put in this position from his powerful family connections to MTV. If you look back through every cast member of MTV's Real World and Road Rules, you'll find each supposedly randomly chosen contestant has family ties to high political figures or other powerful people. And this is what funded the MTV machine at the time, and allowed these rich oligarchs to use the footage of their misbehaving children as Epstein-like blackmail tapes to forever hold over their heads. But while every other past cast member from these types of shows has remained in hiding, how has Christina P made it out of this fate and risen to such fame? Well, according to an open micer from her time in Ontario, the last time Christina took the stage in the 90s was a sold-out show where she started getting heckled by a drunk audience member, and that audience member was none other than Rain Maida, the lead singer of Canada's own Our Lady Peace, who was effectively crashing out due to the recent reviews of their latest album. Well, here's where I had to dig to find the truth. I was able to hack into Christina's old AOL account and read through long-gone emails. And it seems after this last stand-up incident, Christina was ready to quit, but made one last desperate move by emailing Rowan Atkinson, aka Mr. Bean's fan website, begging for help. Well, according to her then roommates, the next morning a black stretch limo was waiting outside their apartment, and they claim she got into that limo and never came back. Well, as much as this sounds like it could be headed down a grotesque sexual path, it's much worse. That's right, Magellan. While most people would never get a response from a celebrity, Rowan Atkinson was one of Magellan's highest-earning recruiters at the time, so he responded to every fan mail he got by sending a black limo and tricking desperate performers into signing with Magellan. For those of you who have said Christina P just seems so familiar, well, that's exactly what you're supposed to feel. You see, within Christina's contract with Magellan, she was signed to play the role known as semi-alt girl, and throughout time, ever since 1993, this Magellan character has existed, always inhabited by different players, and this semi-alt girl becomes easily identifiable if you know the characteristics. This Magellan prototype is known to wear glasses, but wield them as if it's equivalent to having tattoos or piercings, and they use subtle mental trickery to make you feel like they're wild rockers, but it's really just the glasses. So Christina P has been playing the role of semi-alt girl and doing Magellan's dirty work, like making fun of mentally handicapped people online for revenue, or promoting sexual criminals. She's even gone as far as to trick a blind man on TikTok into eating her feces. And there's plenty more strange things about Christina, like the time she slapped a horse to death and spent a month in jail in Taiwan, or the fact that she was actually dating Bert Kreischer before marrying Tim Segundo, only to divorce poor Tim and marry his neighbor Tom Segura. But we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, Christina P, you're a total bitch. Okay everyone, if you're keeping up, me and a Congolese militia and the entire population of Egypt are marching through Saudi Arabia headed to Austin, Texas. I don't know much about Saudi Arabia, but I assume them to be too poor a country to have an airport, so we've crossed into Iraq. I'm sure this country will have the infrastructure to get us back to the good old US of A's. I can see some flames off in the distance, which I can only assume is some type of Olympic torch ceremony rehearsal. For now, we're headed towards the games. TB Nation, wish us luck. Okay, TB Nation, it's time to talk about William Montgomery, because this sweethearted newcomer is not what he seems. Now, we all know William Montgomery rose to power on Kill Tony after being randomly pulled from the bucket, and though it seems as if William's trajectory has been organic, I found out what's been going on behind the scenes, and this will shock you. While William has been open about his past with partying and coming from humble beginnings, this is all just an elaborate cover story to keep you from knowing the real William. For starters, his real last name is Morris, and he's the great-grandson of William Morris, who started the now massive talent agency that dominates the industry. Now, it is true that William loves stand-up comedy, and he even used his family riches to open a comedy club in Montana. But he found that though he was giving back to the comedy community by paying for this club, he wasn't accepted as a comedian himself. People seemed to dislike that the owner would get on the mic and unfairly judged poor William. Eventually, he found it was impossible for him to be taken serious as a comic while being known as a club owner, and sold the business. But he didn't give up on his dream. Instead, he learned from his previous mistakes. He knew he wouldn't have any credibility with other comedians if he just bought his way into the scene. So he very cleverly took a young roast comic named Tony Hinchcliffe and offered to put him on payroll and fully fund a new show called Kill Tony that could propel brand new comics to stardom with just one good set. And William was clever enough not to involve himself from the inception of the show, rather letting the show build up in credibility before they paraded William out as a pretend random bucket pull. And if you're thinking, well, William's early performances on Kill Tony are more subdued and he appears to genuinely have grown as a comedian, it's all a brilliant act. You can find footage of William that predates Kill Tony where he was just as wild, loud, and confident as he allegedly became while being on the show. So William fully funded Kill Tony as a 48-year-old only to promote himself as a brand new comic. And while secretly funding your own dream isn't illegal, I've found something that is. You see, I watched every single performance from William on Kill Tony and took some notes. Now, you might have noticed that after his brutal divorce from comedian Nicole Tran, William's sets seemed to change. He seemed to be including one joke per set that would intentionally fall flat, often including a disgusting reference to eating human feces. Well, I took the last word of every one of these jokes and put them in sequential order, and found it spelled out, "The Red Revenge has begun." I had no idea what this meant and couldn't find any other info related to this phrase. Finally, I paid an international arms dealer to do some digging and found that someone fitting William's description had flown to Cambodia, purchased the jungle warfare militia known as the Khmer Rouge. He then flew the small army out of the country, and while scanning through Instagram, I happened upon a story of Andrew Santino getting a tattoo with the initials RR. It was only then that I remembered seeing the same small tattoo on the neck of Jeremiah Watkins. RR. Red Revenge. From there, I went down the list. Kathy Griffin, Michelle Wolf, Louis C.K., Carrot Top, Bill Burr, even Conan O'Brien. They all had the same terrifying tattoo. But at this point, I reached a roadblock. There was no way for me to find out what this clan of redheads was planning next. That is, until an unlikely ally reached out. I received a handwritten letter from comedian Jim Gaffigan, claiming that he knew of Red Revenge and what they were planning. Jim had apparently become bitter after this group refused to let him in, citing his hair not being definitively red enough. While you might question why I would trust someone with such a wild past, I had to follow the lead. And unfortunately, every claim in Jim Gaffigan's letter has come true. Apparently, William's plan was to get revenge for the suffering of all redheads and then create a red revolution. And he's taken his own words quite literally. That's right, it was William Montgomery himself who commanded the Khmer Rouge to burn down Los Angeles, in an attempt to pay Hollywood back for years of perpetuating stereotypes against redheads. This red revenge will be remembered, as William has vowed that he's never gonna stop. And there's plenty more strange things about this guy, like the fact that he attempted to launch a competitor show with SNL called XNL where the entire cast was naked, or the fact that he was caught on camera by BET karate chopping a snake to death. But we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, William Montgomery, aka William Morris, you're a total bitch. Okay everyone, if you're keeping up, me and the crew entered into Iraq and approached what we assumed were rehearsals for the Olympics, only to find we had stepped into a terrorist training camp. Well, luckily with the Congolese militia and the entire population of Egypt, the terrorists were easy to subdue. We tied them up and forced them to watch an episode of Your Mom's House. As we hoped, they were shocked and horrified by how many ads were allowed to run one after another. And that was all they needed to join the good fight. We're now 200 Iraqis stronger and marching on to defeat the Austin Axis of Evil. TB Nation, rise up. Okay, TB Nation, it's time to talk about John Mulaney, because this story is too bizarre to ignore. While John has used the tabloids to promote himself as a drug addict and alcoholic, the reason why he's been pushing for this new destructive image is anything but sane. So we all know John Mulaney as the former SNL writer and stand-up comedian who appeared to be a clean-cut nerd, but turned out to be a wicked party boy. But to understand the real John, you have to go back to his youth. As you could probably guess, he was a skinny, quiet kid who spent much of his youth being picked on. And while some claim that to be the origin story of many comedians, John's is something a little bit different. Now, John's real first interest was the TV show Xena Warrior Princess, and he even went so far as to have his high school put on a Xena play that no other student chose to act in, forcing John to play all 7 roles to an audience of only 4 teachers. Sadly, John became known as the Xena Kid, and at the time his biggest bully was future actor James Marsden, who happened to go to the same high school in Chicago. And this bullying was even so bad that apparently one time John was even forced to eat human feces while doing the Macarena. While James Marsden would go on to portray heroic characters like Cyclops in the X-Men movie and would get known throughout Hollywood as a sweetheart, back in the days of high school he was a terror to poor John Mulaney. But thankfully, high school doesn't last forever, and when John went off to college he had the chance to reinvent himself. And after finally finding some people that shared similar interests, this new group of friends became obsessed with foreign techno after the release of the movie that would change their lives, The Matrix. But while everyone else was enjoying the dark and industrial beats of Aphex Twin, John didn't seem to have any taste in techno, and often recommended groups that his friends would secretly laugh at. Well, one day John came back to his dorm room with a new tattoo to show off to his cyber-obsessed chums, but found they burst out laughing when he revealed a tattoo of the girl group Tattoo. And while John tried to defend that this 2-girl Russian trance group was in fact techno, he had chosen wrong again and found himself ousted from his group. But it was during this time of loneliness when John chose to look within and find what truly made him happy. He thought back on his accidental one-man Xena Warrior Princess high school play and remembered the rush he felt while performing. And though he had outgrown the serious Shakespearean tone of Xena, he was still interested in performance. And during this lonely period, John had become enraptured by the hit comedy show Mad TV, and started dreaming of being a writer for the show. He was in fact so inspired that he started submitting sketches to the show even before graduating college. But sadly, Mad TV finally wrote him back saying his jokes were simply too perverse and lowbrow. Well, John didn't give up his dream. Instead, he gave up his comedic style entirely and enrolled into Quincy P. Funnyman's School of Stand-Up Comedy. Now, this was by all means a dying business from a long-gone era in Chicago, with the owner himself being the only instructor who hadn't updated his act since 1955. So the young John Mulaney found himself in a small class of men whose average age was 70. And while this squeaky clean bubblegum rapper baseball joke style might have been considered a corny cliche for a 70-year-old comedian, it seemed to have a new spin when coming out of the mouth of the young Mulaney. People weren't expecting this almost vaudevillian style of performance at modern local stand-up shows, and soon John was building a name for himself. Sadly, at the same time he was rising in the stand-up ranks, Mad TV was plummeting in the ratings, and eventually John's favorite show was cancelled. Now, we all know how John was ironically offered a writing position at SNL, and how he reluctantly took the offer, citing that he never really liked the show or the vibe. And we also all know about John's public battle with addiction, but I did some digging and found out a truth that will exceed all expectations. While John has openly spoken of his substance abuse, no one ever seemed to ask how he got prescribed these pills in the first place. And after hacking into Magellan's medical system, I found out the sick truth. You see, apparently throughout the years, John Mulaney has been getting unnecessary elective surgeries. And whether the subsequent addiction is real or just a cover story, it gets much stranger. You see, before the X Games was a worldwide respected sporting event, it started off much smaller and was called the Extreme Games. And if you look back at these original Extreme Games, you'll see listed as the creator of the event is Magellan. Even more strange, you can find John Mulaney listed as a contestant in the first event, though any footage of what took place has been scrubbed from the internet. But according to friends at the time, John had entered this competition listing himself as a pro inline skater when he was in fact barely an amateur, attempting to impress some random girl. And as you might expect, John got severely injured at this event. While friends say he recovered quickly and didn't seem too shaken, spectators at the event claimed John was put into an ambulance-like vehicle with Magellan written on the side of the van. I remembered back to an old interview of John's where he said James Marsden used to taunt him, calling him Jawless John. And you might have noticed recently that John Mulaney's jaw has almost tripled in size. It finally all made sense. In order to get revenge on James Marsden, John was becoming the real-life Wolverine and systematically replacing all of his bones with titanium. That's right, the X Games are just a sick event designed to cause horrific injuries that Magellan can use as an excuse to create real-life X-Men. John had signed a deal with the devil to treat the former Cyclops to a real-life clobbering. And there's plenty more weird stuff about this guy, like how he wrote a new national anthem and was kicked out of a Bennigan's in Vermont for refusal to stop singing, or the time he tricked Obama Obama into eating a hot chip live on TV. But we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, John Mulaney, you're a total bitch. Okay, TB Nation, if you're keeping up, we've been marching through the Middle East for weeks, and we finally crossed over into Nepal. While this ragtag army has endured so much, this might be our biggest fight yet. Mount Everest. If the legends are true, the spirits of this mountain will keep us alive as we're on an honorable mission of destroying Kill Tony. While we might not have any climbing gear or knowledge, I'm confident with the 112 million people with us, we'll be able to create a human bridge to simply walk across. TB Nation, wish us luck. Okay, TB Nation, it's time to hear the tale of Rachel Wolfson. While most people were introduced to her in the most recent Jackass movie, she seems to have come out of nowhere. And if you look at Rachel's IMDb, she essentially didn't exist until 2018. So how did this stand-up with few credits reach the heights of movie stardom? Well, the twisted truth about Rachel will change everything you thought you knew about Hollywood. Rachel, who grew up in Las Vegas, had dreams of stardom since being a child, and in fact had attempted acting all throughout her youth. But try as she might, she never could land the role. The first big loss was when Rachel auditioned to play Hilary Duff's best friend on Lizzie McGuire, only to lose out to Elaine Vergara. It was a devastating blow to the young actress, and deterred her from attempting performing again for years. And it's during this dark time that Rachel became addicted to Nerd's Rope and started listening to the dark and sinister tones of The Used. She reportedly even at one point had considered smoking a cigarette. And from that point on, there's no record of Rachel's existence up until she resurfaced in 2018 to audition for another big Disney role. While you might have thought she would have aged out of desiring Disney stardom, Rachel apparently hadn't given up, and found herself auditioning for the role of Shengo in the Kim Possible live-action movie. Now, she was apparently a shoo-in for this role, but lost out last minute to Trevor Wallace's girlfriend Taylor Ortega. And this is apparently what sent Rachel over the edge, and led her to filming herself doing all sorts of insane acts that caused brutal injuries. On these insane recordings, Rachel seemed possessed and unaffected by bone-breaking stunts and grotesque acts. There was even a clip that went viral on the dark web of Rachel eating human feces. And this is what led a Jackass producer to scout her from these insane uploads. So Rachel Wolfson goes from Disney kid wannabe to goat-punching, lightbulb-eating wacko on the silver screen. So as strange of a path as it may have been, Rachel Wolfson had made it. But something still seemed off. That's when I did some hacking into Gas Digital and located this email dispute between Rachel's manager and Christine. Apparently Rachel has to back out of Skankfest this year and won't give a reason why. Well, I looked up this manager and found they have Rachel's time blocked out during the exact same days as the When We Were Young 2025 music festival. And then it all hit me. All those unaccounted for years. Emo. She's not Rachel Wolfson. She's Rachel Wolf's son, aka Ben Jorgensen, the lead singer of Armor for Sleep, who shares the same mother with comic Michelle Wolf. So Rachel can't perform at Skankfest this year because she'll be performing in Armor for Sleep at the same time. And the truth is, even I don't know whether Rachel is Ben or Ben is Rachel. But after releasing this info, I do know one thing: they'll be coming for me. And there's plenty more strange things about Rachel, like her ongoing feud with Wayne Knight, or how she's been linked to the death of Ron Jeremy, but we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, Rachel Wolfson, aka Ben Jorgensen, you're a total bitch. Okay everyone, if you're keeping track, me, a Congolese militia, a small Iranian terrorist group, and the entire population of Egypt are attempting to cross Mount Everest. We've been given maps and have started marching up the frozen mountain. I think if we all just keep moving, our body heat will help us deal with the extreme cold. For now, we climb. TB Nation, wish us luck. Okay folks, it's time to talk about Pauly Shore. After watching the recent clearly scripted and edited Stephen Baldwin interview on his podcast, I had to know the truth. So everyone knows that Pauly Shore is the son of the late Mitzi Shore, former owner of the Comedy Store, and how Pauly became an MTV and movie sensation in his youth. But Pauly seemed to go missing since the early 2000s, only sporadically popping up in strange foreign productions. Well, I did some digging and found the truth. You see, while Pauly had become a movie star after box office smashes like Encino Man and Son-in-Law, growing up in the wild world of comedy clubs in Hollywood had rendered poor Pauly Shore an addict. He had sadly become entirely dependent on sniffing the classic Mr. Sketch scented markers, and was apparently huffing up to 3 packs a day. And it wasn't just Pauly affected, as he seemingly intentionally got Andy Dick hooked on the same markers during the filming of his next movie, In the Army Now. But it was at the premiere of a Goofy movie where Pauly Shore went too far and forever altered his career. See, at this live event premiering the animated Disney full-length feature film, Pauly had sniffed almost triple the dosage of Mr. Sketch markers he would do any given day. And attempting not to pass out, he stumbled forward and knocked over a massive Goofy display statue that landed directly on Tevin Campbell, the young and up-and-coming singer and voice of the movie's very own Powerline. And while Tevin Campbell survived this horrible event, it shattered both his legs and rendered him bedridden for 2 years. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, Tevin had just signed a multi-million-dollar deal with Disney to essentially become the next Michael Jackson. If that wasn't bad enough, this all occurred right after Magellan had bought up most of the stock in Disney, and then strong-armed the company into handing over control. So Pauly was on the hook for a potential loss of future billions. And as you probably know by now, Magellan Incorporated is not a company you want to be in bad standing with. Well, before they made Pauly disappear, they intended to make some of the lost profit back, and threw Pauly into a series of movies that, if you look close enough, sent a subliminal message to the public about Pauly's guilt, imprisonment, and eventual death. Magellan didn't want the public questioning where Pauly was after they got rid of him, but making these films caused a twist of fate that ended up saving Pauly's life. Like I said at the beginning, if you watch Pauly's recent interview with the former Biodome co-star Stephen Baldwin, you'll see it's anything but casual and is in fact entirely scripted. They didn't want any online sleuthers to trace anything they said back to Magellan. Stephen and Pauly had become close friends. I'd always wondered how on earth Stephen Baldwin was ever cast in any role. He was simply bad. It couldn't just be the residual fame rubbing off from his brother Alec. Otherwise, Hollywood would be chock full of weird celebrity brothers. And that's when I spotted it. Listed in Magellan's recent unearthed tax records is Alexander Ray Baldwin II, Alec Baldwin's dad. It all made sense. This was the only way these stooges were getting cast in movies. A full-on family connect. And it's these same connections that Stephen Baldwin used to save Pauly's life. He was able to wrangle a deal with the higher-ups at Magellan that would let Pauly live and utilize his former training from in the Army now. To save his own life, he would have to serve in covert military operations around the globe. And that's why between 2003 and 2021, Pauly was only featured in 5 films. He's in fact been sniping foreign adversaries for Magellan, and you can see the toll it's taken on his psyche. But finally, after finishing the Russian covert ops children's film Pinocchio in 2021, he's been released from his military duties. And though many have questioned him regarding this Russian-based Pinocchio film that seemed to implant military thoughts into the minds of children, Pauly has never admitted the truth. And if you think he's done working for Magellan, you're simply wrong, as he's now transitioned into being a scout to recruit new naive performers to sign with the evil company. And he uses his podcast to vet potential new victims, with 45% of his guests eventually signing with Magellan, thanks in part to the coercive tactics of William Montgomery's ex-wife, Nicole Tran. And there's plenty more strange things about this guy, like the fact that he was the original founder of the Welsh rock band Lost Prophets, whose original goal was to make a crappy imitation band to sell to MTV and help pay back his debt to Magellan. Well, we all know how this one-time lame band is now linked to crimes of the century, but we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, Pauly Shore, you're a total bitch. Okay everyone, if you're keeping up, things have taken a turn for the worse. After climbing for hours, we've reached a sheer cliff. While we were planning on making a human bridge, this gap is simply impossible. And that's when I looked at the back of my map and found this sick message.
Hey, total bitch, I told you to chill out, but you just wouldn't listen. Well, I guess now you'll be the coolest guy in town after all.
That's when I realized there was no way to get back down to safety before the sun went down. Tony Hinchcliffe had trapped us up here to freeze to death. TB Nation, if there was ever a time we needed you, it's now. Okay folks, it's time to talk about Brent Weinbach. And if you don't know who that is, that's exactly what this master manipulator wants. While he might be listed as an alternative comic, he's also an alternative human. Now, to understand the origins of the story, you have to go all the way back to Brent's childhood, where he was mercilessly picked on by his older brother Dryden. And according to Brent, it was a constant battle just to be left alone, citing one time where his older brother took his toy bus and threw it out of the window of a moving car. Or how his older brother would always call Brent Eddie, just to make him angry. Now apparently in middle school, Brent became obsessed with the movie Powder, somehow relating to its main character's struggle. And it's during a family trip to New Orleans when Brent and Dryden got into a shoving match over Brent's new Digipet. Now apparently after freeing his beloved new toy from Dryden's hand, he ran off into a field during a rainstorm and was struck by lightning, just like in his favorite movie Powder. But thankfully Brent didn't evaporate into electricity to the enjoyment of Jeff Goldblum, but he was severely injured. The majority of the lightning bolt was was absorbed by Brent's digipet, but he was still left bedridden for months and was in and out of consciousness. Well, by the time Brent was fully recovered, he was entering high school and his older brother was moving off to college. And for the next couple of years, everything seemed to mellow out, barring one time where Dryden was home on break and tampered with Brent's high school science project. Apparently, Brent had made a compelling PowerPoint presentation about how insects could potentially survive on other planets to help terraform them, but Dryden had secretly slipped a photo known as lemonparty.org into the middle of the presentation, getting poor Brent sent to detention. But eventually, his older brother's wild behavior caught up to him and he was kicked out of college. It seemed Dryden was finally getting what he deserved. That is, until he started a band that got signed to DreamWorks in 2000 and made Alien Ant Farm a household name by covering Michael Jackson's Smooth Criminal. And while many have pointed out the foolishness of covering this song that only made Michael Jackson money and did little for the band, it was only Brent who knew the truth.
Eddie, are you okay?
Only Brent knew how every song the band made was purely to make fun of him. Even the name Alien Ant Farm was just a bitter reminder of a lemon once squoze. If you recall, Alien Ant Farm was a massive band in the early 2000s and were seemingly just getting started. While many people don't know that the band was in a horrific bus accident while on tour that caused major injuries, including Dryden breaking his neck and even the death of the bus driver. And the recovery time from these injuries plus the trauma it caused shook this zany Beavis and Butthead band. And eventually, time passed by Alien Ant Farm. And while this seemed to be a completely random event, I stumbled upon the twisted truth. Now, if you've been following Jason Derulo's crypto scams, you know by now he's accidentally leaked private documents many times. And I found this batch of messages between him and someone called Pogo Master BW. And then I remembered Brent's involvement in professional pogo sticking, having earned several Silver Springs himself. And if that wasn't enough, I found an interview with Brent from 2018 where he declared Jason Derulo the next Sex Pistols. Pogo Master BW was clearly Brent, and he was clearly doing dodgy crypto grifting. But that's not what I was interested in. You see, these messages allege that when Brent was struck by lightning in middle school, be it the programming of the digipet or mystical region of New Orleans, it seemed he was rendered with the powers of digital voodoo. So Brent Weinbach is somehow able to program voodoo curses via the HTML in his brain. Everyone who's ever crossed Brent has had to pay, but they'll never know it was him. And that's the only reasonable explanation for some of today's most shocking TV moments. Like when Johnny Resnick, the singer of the Goo Goo Dolls, ate his own feces live on Kelly Clarkson's daytime talk show, or Adrian Brody's shockingly offensive Rastafarian character on SNL. It's all because of Brent's digital voodoo curses. And it's even been alleged that Brent is trying to build up some type of supernatural society by inviting other southern wizards like Shane Bianchi to move to LA and help cultivate the city's magic. One by one, Brent's ushering in a new era of real-life witchcraft, being used to climb the ranks of Hollywood. And there's plenty more strange things about this guy, like the time he got into a physical brawl with 3-6 Mafia at the VH1 Christmas party, or how he's been building a nuclear bomb. But we'll have to save that for another time. Until then, Brent Weinbach, you're a total bitch. Okay everyone, if you're keeping track, Tony Hinchcliffe stranded us halfway up Mount Everest. The sun was rapidly setting, so we had no choice. We had to push through. Literally. Me and the entire population of Egypt pushed on the mountain as hard as we could until it finally gave way and crumbled. We may have just knocked over the tallest mountain in the world, but there was no time to celebrate. We had to move. It's time to get China involved in the fight against the Austin Axis of Evil. TB Nation, rise up.